Hi, I'm Kelly Thomas. Welcome to Ingenious Baby. Every week I'll interview leading experts to help you help your child reach their full potential so that your child can become all that they were born to be.
Welcome to Ingenious Baby.
Joining us today is Dr. Tony Wagner, a Harvard education specialist and author of Creating Innovators, the making of young people who will change the world. He will tell us today's most essential real-world skill and what children need most from their parents, teachers, and mentors to become innovators of the future. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to have you because I think all of your books and your work is just so important for everyone to know about. And I want to talk about this book here, the innovation, idea of innovation, and why is that so important?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on your show, Kelly. I look forward to having a chat with you. You know, I became increasingly aware in my research that we no longer really have what people have called a knowledge economy. Peter Drucker coined that term in 1959. Today, what matters most is not what you know, because Google knows everything after all, but what you can do with what you know. And that's a completely different and brand new problem. What I've come to understand is that the coin of realm today, the skill that matters most, whether it's profit, nonprofit, anywhere in the world, is the capacity to solve problems creatively. You know, creative problem solving is a kind of innovation. There's two kinds. There's innovation that brings new possibilities to life. Think, your iPhone. But there's also creative problem solving, which is a kind of incremental innovation. So I've been trying to understand what must we do differently to develop the capabilities of virtually all of our young people to be creative problem solvers.
So what are those skills?
Well, first of all, the good news is we really can nurture these capabilities. We are born curious, creative, imaginative. That's the human DNA. Average 5-year-old asks 100 questions a day, and most 5-year-olds think of themselves as artists. But then something happens, Kelly. We call it school. Because you see, the longer kids are in school, the less curious they become, the fewer questions they ask, the more they become absolutely preoccupied with getting the right answers. And very, very few of them think of themselves as artistic in any way. So the first challenge is to continue to nurture that curiosity that is innate in all of us. And a good parenting really continues to ask kids kind of what are their questions, to take them seriously, to honor them, to find ways to help our kids kind of satisfy their curiosity by taking time to explore new things or to investigate topics of interest to them.
So you talk a lot about the schools. I mean, we could start, do you think this starts just from even before school or preschool, just nurturing that, or are you more focused on, when they actually are starting school and helping?
Well, it's both. I mean, I deeply believe that there's a lot we parents can do, and I'm a parent and now a grandparent, and I'm very aware of the ways in which, you take a child's questions and interests seriously. You're strengthening the muscle of intrinsic motivation and of the capacity to focus and concentrate and develop self-discipline. All of those things, I think, come with helping a young person to see the value of his or her questions, to have a voice and to take those interests seriously.
When you cultivate curiosity, is it the child? Are they naturally creative? Is it the parent that helps them creative? Is it the environment, or what is it that helps them be creative or innovative?
I think the capacity to innovate begins with curiosity. But then you look at schooling, and there's 5 fundamental contradictions between the traditional culture of schooling and the culture that develops the capacity to innovate. First and foremost, schooling is all about working individually, but as we know, innovation is a team sport. Second of all, schools compartmentalize subjects in a system that's over 100 years old, whereas in the world of innovation, you cannot understand or solve problems without an interdisciplinary approach. Thirdly, the culture of classrooms is so often a culture of passivity. It's a culture of consumption and compliance. But the world of innovation demands that you take initiative, demands that you acquire knowledge just in time to solve real problems. And I think the 4th and 5th contradictions are the most challenging of all. Contradiction 4, and this is, I think, a lot where parents come in, is all about the F word in schools. All of the ways in which we penalize so-called failure. We grade kids according to how many mistakes they make. But when you ask adults, as I have, have you learned more from your mistakes than your successes? We've all learned tremendously from our mistakes. And in fact, I think that trial and error is how we learn many of our most important lessons as developing adults. I mean, beginning with learning how to talk, learning how to walk, learning how to ride a bike. Trial and error is the way we learn. And it is also absolutely essential in the innovation era. Companies talk about fail early, fail fast, fail cheap, fail smart, fail forward, but fail. Now, they don't mean fail in an academic sense. They're talking about iteration. They're talking about a process of rapid prototyping and learning through trial and error. And we discourage kids from taking thoughtful risks. We encourage them to kind of never make mistakes. And that is completely antithetical to the world of innovation. And then very briefly, the last contradiction is all about motivation. You know, we rely, I think, far too heavily, we being both parents and educators, we rely far too heavily on carrots and sticks to motivate learning, rewards and punishments. But what I've discovered is that the young people who are making the greatest difference in the world today are intrinsically motivated. They want to make a difference. They want work where they can make a contribution. So I think all of these things are aspects of both parenting and teaching that we need to keep in mind if we're going to develop the capacities of many more young people to be innovators.
Like in particular, the motivation, I think, is a difficult one because, for example, I have one of my children, he's 4 now, and he had begged me for a year to take violin. So I have taken him to the violin, and now we've been doing it. He's like, oh, I don't want to do it anymore. When do you move through it, or do you move to something else, or how do you get that motivation?
You know, I think it's hard to make those judgments. I have a whole chapter about parenting, and parents talk about these difficult trade-offs of when do you say to a child, okay, you can try this new sport or this new instrument, but you have to try it for X amount of time to give it a fair chance. Now, you didn't know that going in, but maybe next time, you know, that's what you'd say. Well, you have to give it a fair try, to give it a chance. But I think on balance, it's really important to listen to what a child says when they said, I want to try this, I want to learn that, you know, and then to try to structure the opportunity in such a way that it becomes enjoyable. I mean, very often, I studied classical guitar starting at the age of 30, and most ways of teaching music are drudgery. Mm-hmm. So the contrast between what you think it's going to be and what it ends up being is very different. So I think one of the challenges, and I've heard this from many parents, is to find teachers who make learning an instrument or any other new activity something that's fun from the start. Mm-hmm. And there are ways of doing that. What I came to understand when we talk about intrinsic motivation is that parents and teachers who are most concerned with strengthening intrinsic motivation specifically encouraged play, passion, and purpose. Mm-hmm. Parents encourage kids to get outside, fewer toys, toys without batteries, more imaginative play. They restricted screen time. As kids got older, they encouraged them to stay curious, to pursue their interests which in time could morph into passions. But, you know, as kids grew older, even further in late adolescence, passions morph, they change, they evolve. But in every case, the parents helped young people to understand something about a deeper sense of purpose, because both parents and teachers had instilled the idea that we are not here on this earth just to serve ourselves. We have some responsibility to give back and to make a difference. So those three things, play, passion, and purpose, and they're kind of developmental and sequential, because when you ultimately get to purpose as an adult, it's a form of disciplined play. You know, when you talk about being a scientist or being an artist, those are forms of disciplined play, which in many ways are the highest expression of really what it means to be a human.
When you talk about play is such a vague word. What does that mean?
It can be play, it can be dress-up play with clothes, it can be, you know, playing with sticks. And, you know, I know parents are afraid and, oh my gosh, you know, we can't let him climb the tree because he's going to fall. Probably. He'll probably fall, or she'll probably fall. But, you know, parents have to progressively let go. And they also have to understand that kids are different. Some kids will take stupid risks and will, you know, be more likely than other kids to break an arm because they're not cautious. So you have to make these judgments as a parent as to when and how much to be able to let go and give your child an opportunity to try new things. I mean, what if we said to kids, I'm sorry, you're never going to learn to ride a bike because I know you're going to fall and skin your knee. And almost certainly they will. But then what kind of world would we be where kids couldn't try things and couldn't take responsible risks? So I think that's the art of parenting, is when to figure out when to let go and when to kind of hold a little closer.
You talk about how a lot of schools are set up to squelch out that wanting to learn and sort of that how they sort of drop, particularly around like 4th, 5th grade and their interest in schooling. You talk about the Montessori schools and how that create the biggest bunch of creative innovators that we know today. But what if someone can't afford to go to a Montessori school and they're going to public school? How can you help create that foster innovation without it getting squelched out?
Well, first of all, there are public Montessori schools. I live in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and one of the most popular schools in Cambridge, a public school, is a Montessori school. So it's not hopeless. But having said that, I think there's a great deal parents can do in encouraging a variety of extracurricular activities. Scouting can often be very productive and exciting for kids, both boys and girls. Mm-hmm. So can, maker fairs and maker spaces and other kinds of after-school activities. One thing I've encouraged parents and teachers to consider is inviting children to keep a question journal where they simply write down questions that are interesting to them, or questions or topics or issues, and then periodically sit down with the child and have him or her circle the question that's of most interest, and then try to help that person find the time and the space, create the space to explore that question, to pursue that interest.
A lot of the examples in your book were people, who I would consider, gifted. So do you think that, the creative innovation is someone? Do you need a high IQ? How does that play into it, or how are those two interrelated?
I think we really don't understand different kinds of intelligence. My colleague at Harvard, Howard Gardner, has written a great deal about multiple intelligence, and we know that so-called IQ tests test a very limited range of skills. Mm-hmm. And in fact, some of the innovators whom I profiled in my book, young innovators, were ADHD, were terrible at school. They probably would not have scored well on a conventional IQ test, mm-hmm. because IQ tests don't usually measure creative problem-solving skills or imagination or curiosity, certainly not that. And yet those are the qualities that end up mattering the most in my experience.
So how can you measure it?
I don't think you measure it. I think you assess it. And Google's a very interesting example in your neighborhood. Google used to only hire kids from Ivy League schools, mm-hmm. and would only interview those kids who had the highest test scores and GPAs, because they assumed that doing well in school and doing well on tests was a good measure of the kind of creative intelligence they need in their work. Well, along comes Laszlo Bock, Senior VP of People Operations at Google, analyzes the data and discovers all of the indices they've been using for hiring and promotion were, quote, worthless. His word, not mine.
Wow.
He went on to say the skills you need to succeed in a competitive academic environment bear absolutely no relationship to the skills you need to succeed in the innovation era. Right now, today, Google doesn't ask for a college transcript. The word college does not even appear on their jobs website. They don't ask you for your GPAs or your test scores. In fact, 15% of Google's recent hires don't have a BA degree at all. So what are they using instead? They're using collective human judgment informed by interviews, informed by evidence, to make their assessments for hiring and promotion. What do we mean by collective human judgment? 5, 6, 7 people interviewing a person, asking for evidence. Instead of saying, what grade did you get, or what classes did you take? Tell me about a complex problem you had to solve recently. Tell me about a time you failed, and what did you do about it? We have to make the distinction between measurement, numbers, mm-hmm. and assessment, which relies on human judgment. How do you know whether or not somebody has a good character? You know it when you see it and feel it, but you don't know it from a number, do you?
Mm-hmm. My kids, I spend a lot of, effort in their kind of education now with the Montessori. I'd be okay if they didn't go to college, they wanted to start a business or something. And, I think, like you said, a lot of people are so focused on going to Harvard or, getting the education. I feel like you have to start at the youngest age to prepare them for later. So
absolutely. My colleague Ted Dintersmith and I wrote a book called Most Likely to Succeed, and he produced a brilliant documentary by the same title, Most Likely to Succeed. What we learned in that work was that the kids who were most successful at school were not, in most cases, going to be the ones most likely to succeed in life. Just as Laszlo Bock said, what you learn in school is how to jump through hoops, how to please teachers, how to pass tests that largely do not really accurately assess the kinds of skills we've been talking about, especially these state tests. I mean, what our educators have to do to meet ridiculous accountability standards is setting back the whole field of education,
right.
is dumbing down teaching and learning in our classes. So to me, the challenge is to really understand that we need to bring education into alignment with what kids are going to be expected to do in the adult world. They don't take tests. They don't move, every 45 minutes from one class to the next to the next. They don't memorize a bunch of stuff. They're not told to put away their phones and take out their number 2 pencils. It's exactly the opposite. Mm-hmm. So anyway, we could go on and on about that.
When you're looking at schools, what are some of the most important things to be looking at?
Go visit classes and look at what's being taught, look at how it's being taught. And if you're bored in that class, almost for certain, your child's going to be bored. Mm-hmm. There are schools that downplay, testing, that de-emphasize competition, and instead try to give kids more time for projects and for their own kind of independent inquiries and research. Those are the things I would look for, and those are the things I did look for when I was searching for schools for my own children. I think to me that's the most important, really listening to the child as someone who can be very thoughtful and reflective at a very young age.
What kind of teaching is the best motivator for kids? I mean, we kind of touched on this a little bit, but I guess you could be a little bit more detailed about what's the best way to teach kids to keep them motivated?
Well, I think there's a number of good, innovative strategies to develop intrinsic motivation for kids. A lot of people today talk about project-based learning, the idea that kids work individually and in small groups on projects around an interesting question or a particular problem. I think that has great value. But it's not the only way to do it. I've seen also something called an inquiry approach, where you start with an essential question and you organize an entire course around some essential questions. Mm-hmm. For example, if I were teaching American history or literature today, I wouldn't teach it as a separate subject.
I appreciate you sharing all of your research and knowledge, and it's so important that just education and just supplementing what we can do to help create our kids to create their own jobs.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking with you, Kelly. And I sympathize with parents, and now being a grandparent, I'm kind of reliving it all. It's not easy. Yeah. Especially in a rapidly changing world. There's no set formula. There's no, Dr. Benjamin Spock telling you exactly how to do it. A lot of it, I'm afraid, is iteration. It's trial and error. Yeah. And so that's the nature of parenting and good teaching these days as well.
If you know someone who'd be a great fit for the show, come on over to ingeniousbaby.com and share your tips and story ideas. You are your baby's first and best teacher.